Hello everyone and welcome back. In this lesson we're going to talk about the Angular ngStyle core directive. So as we have seen in the last lesson, we can use ngClass to add CSS classes to our component conditionally, depending on the value of the course data, for example. In the same way that we want to add CSS classes conditionally, we might also want to add CSS styles directly. Most of the time, we are going to be able to style our components by simply using plain CSS classes and nothing more. But there are occasions where we would like to apply a style directly to a component. Let's then quickly apply a style to one of these elements and see how styling works without using ngStyle first. Let's say that, for example, we would like to make this text here, the title of the card, underlined. We can do that using the input template syntax in the following way. We are going to access the style property of our element. So this is a DOM property, this is not Angular specific, and we are going to write into it a value under the text decoration property. So we are going to say that the text decoration style element of this course title div here is going to have the value underline. So if we refresh here our application, we are going to see that now all the cards have here an underlined title. Now imagine that instead of only one style, we would like to apply multiple styles to this div. So we would have to use multiple times this syntax, one for each style. A more convenient way of applying multiple styles to an element is to use instead the ngStyle directive. So we are going to be using again the input syntax, but this time we are using ngStyle. ngStyle is going to take here on the right hand side a configuration object whose properties are the styles that we want to modify. So in this case we want to modify the text decoration property, and whose values are the value of the property itself. So in this case we want to set text decoration to underline, and if we would like to add here multiple other styles, we can do so via this configuration object by providing here multiple properties. So as you can see, the underline is still being applied here to our card title. Now we can also pass here an expression to ngStyle, like it happened here in the case of ngClass. We can, in a similar way, call here a function that we are going to be creating here at the level of our component. This function can return a configuration object just like we did for ngClass. So we can return here our configuration object, and if we try this out, we are going to see that everything is still working just like before, but this makes it much simpler to turn on and off certain styles programmatically here at the level of the template, as we have access here to the course input object. Notice that we could also access the course object here, but if we start adding too much logic to our template, then the template becomes less readable. Instead of adding too much logic here, it's better to simply call a function at the level of our component and implement here our logic in TypeScript. And just like it happened before in the case of ngClass, we really want to avoid to have constant values here. We should only define here styles using ngStyle for properties that are dynamic and depend on the content of the data. Let's give here a quick example. Imagine that instead of displaying here the course image using the image tag, we would like to display the image as a CSS background of this card here. So in order to do that, we would need the following CSS property. We will need to set background-image. So this is a CSS property that can be applied to any div that is going to apply a given image as the background of a section of the page. In order for this to work, we need to call URL, and we need to pass in here a complete URL to the image that we want to use as background. So we can concatenate here the icon URL of our course, for example. And we could add here multiple other dynamic properties if needed. Before trying this out, let's switch back here to our example. We were accidentally applying here our styles here only to the title. We want to instead apply this new dynamic style to the complete card. So if we now try this out, we are going to see that our div is receiving as its background the course image as intended. As you can see, there are a lot of options for styling our components. Let's put back here our image and quickly discuss the multiple options that we have available for styling our components. So most of the times we want to style our components with plain CSS classes, such as the one that we have here. That is the most common way of styling our components. We should not use systematically ngClass or ngStyle. ngClass should be used a lot more frequently than ngStyle. ngClass is meant for conditionally adding or removing classes depending on the content of our data. So typically we want to use ngClass only for CSS state classes that indicate the presence of a given state in our component. On the other hand, sometimes there are certain CSS properties that we want to populate depending on the data. An example of that type of property is the background image property, as we have seen. So if we run into that case when we want to set a particular CSS property with data-dependent content, for that we can use ngStyle. We are going to learn still a lot more about styling in the next few sections. Right now, let's continue covering the main Angular core directives. Let's talk about ngSwitch.